Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the MOSA Catalyst Community Webinar Series. I think a lot of you probably saw that we've had some changes in our schedule with a very busy season for people in the Department of Defense, and so we had the Army Agile Systems move out until the beginning of the year, and at the same time had a number of other interesting topics. And we're joined today by Mr. Cliff Loudon from the Secretary of the Air Force Acquisition and Research Engineering Office. And Cliff and I talked about this at the National Defense Industrial Association Systems Engineering Conference. There is a ton of information changing in the way the Air Force does business around modular open systems and digital engineering, and these things are so closely unified. And so I asked Cliff if he'd be able to join us, and he is coming to us remotely, and hopefully everyone can see the slides. And so, by way of a brief introduction, Cliff is the Modular Open Systems Approach Program Element Monitor at SAF AQRE at the Pentagon. And underneath of his portfolio are all of the Air Force open architecture programs. I think I've said that correctly. And so, without taking any more of his time, I will turn it over to Cliff. Cliff, do we have you on the microphone?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we've got you loud and clear. Okay, so I'll be monitoring questions in the background, and so feel free to use the chat or questions. And then towards the end of Cliff's presentation, I'll come back on and we'll blow through some of those questions. Cliff, over to you.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for letting me spend a few moments to tell you about what we've got going on at the Air Force. I can't actually see the slide, so I'm gonna just kind of call out where I am. So on the title slide, the idea is that within the Air Force, we want to take a systematic approach to digital transformation, and that sounds great, but what does that really mean, right? So we'll put a pin in that for just a moment. So like John mentioned, one of my roles is as the PIM for Modular Open Systems. That manifests as we have a office within AFL-CMC called the Open Architecture Management Office. And within their portfolio includes OMS-UCI. And they're also working on GERA, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Also within the Air Force in the office two doors down, my colleagues at SAF AQX are working on the Agile Mission Suite, AMS GRA. So between those two, we're going to try to take a systematic and kind of deliberate approach to developing our new capabilities within the digital domain. Two other wings that are digital engineering and then digital standardization. So luckily, I'm also the Air Force's Departmental Standardization Officer, which means I have the pleasure of working on our standards side too. So with that, second slide, please. Okay, so we've kind of taken a three-prong approach. The words digital trio are what spring to mind. Unfortunately, that's a pretty popular kind of nomenclature, with the digital triad and digital trinity being other ones. So what that really means is between open architectures, digital material management, and digital standardization, we'll use that as our foundation for modern systems engineering. Okay, even that is a little bit of a buzzword, right? So what we see as modern systems engineering is really classical systems engineering, but with the right tools, the right culture, the right mind frame to go forward and use the best that we have to do good systems engineering. So with digital material management, we want to try to synchronize data across the Air Force, the multiple program offices, the different functions. It's all about having access to the same data, not just ones and zeros, but even your presentations, your white papers, all that goes into making good informed decision making should all be readily available. So one layer up from that is also open architecture management, using those great new tools, all that access to data. We can standardize a bit on how we develop our systems. No sense in reinventing the wheel if it's already been invented and is well developed, right? And to help along with that is use of our digital guide that's come out of AFLCMC to kind of kick off for those of us who are transitioning to using the more modern tools, how to do that, how to build it into our systems, how to build it into our program offices as well. It's a two-pronged thing, right, where it's not enough to know how to use the tools, but also get everybody on board with using the tools to really leverage the power of having smart people rowing in the same direction. Slide 3, please. So we've kind of been at this for 20 plus years now within the Air Force. Everyone's kind of gone off and started building out GRAs, or what I would like to just say RAs, and spend a lot of money to develop things that will and can help shorten development timelines. Unfortunately, if everyone's building their own, then that's not really much of a standard. So the kind of analogy I like to use is that if this was a student at 20 years old, they're coming up on their junior or senior of college, and with all that great potential, all that money invested, all that time invested, now it's time to kind of pick a path and learn how to specialize in that path. So going forward, we want to, kind of get all our lessons learned, all our new tools, everything going together in a coordinated fashion. Slide 4. So talking a little bit about the architectures, you can start with the standards. When you start with the standard, then everyone can kind of see where the logic flows from. We use those standards to build our prototypes using that knowledge that has come before, and start building our prototypes and apply good systems engineering practice. And that kind of leads us into 3 different flavors of architectures. Here we kind of list reference, objective, and solution architecture. And that just kind of highlights the different levels that we're trying to tackle, with reference being those top-level authoritative requirements, and then the objective being that more in the weeds with the program office tailoring as they need to, down to the actual engineer in the solution architecture side, fulfilling those requirements. Slide 5. Here's just kind of a little bit of an expansion of that concept from the previous page. And you can kind of see where each team member has their place in making the whole thing work, where we have the organizational leader kind of guiding those top line requirements, the program office engineer tailoring, and then again industry helping to bring in the solution, help to actually solve the problem at hand. Slide 6. So with those teammates working in coordination, then we can start applying these open architecture ideas to 2 flavors of aircraft. We have our legacy aircraft, and then we have the future aircraft. So diving a little bit into the legacy aircraft, we want to bring our older platforms up to modern standards and since modernization will be necessary anyway, the sooner we can implement open architecture principles into those upgrades, the more return on investment we'll see in the form of shortened timelines, quicker integration, hopefully leading to saved money as well. So in this case, you might see the government avionics reference architecture GARA being applied to older aircraft as a way to speed them up into integration with newer aircraft. We'll be able to integrate newer radios that will be able to talk with other platforms and a slew of other capabilities. Just this picture shows EW and position, navigation, timing. Next slide. On slide 7, as an example, we have an F-15, and by applying GARA and the modernization of it, we can start using established reference architectures such as SOSA, Big Iron Face, REGI, to bring them up to the current state of the art, maybe even beyond the current state of the art, so that it's able to integrate with our other newer platforms. For example, B-21. Slide 8. So GARA is kind of a toolkit that will bring us up to speed on our legacy aircraft. Right now we have a minimum viable product, more of a .5 release that kind of couples those previous RAs into a single kit so that those who need to apply it will be able to go in and not have to start from scratch, not have to necessarily find out where they are, and then where they're going. We could say, hey, here you are, here's a good direction to go in. And so goals for next year on GARA are to really get that toolkit out to the people that need it, have it be applied, and then develop a consortium of contractors to help maintain that as a standard. So similarly, for OMS UCI, we have a consortium of experts from across the defense industry, such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Anduril. These people come together and they mature the OMS standard. And so we would like to see a similar capability to keep GARA going forward as well. Slide 9. Here's just a little bit more detail on GARA. I don't want to spend too much more time, but you can see on the graphics on the right that there are user guides, we have SysML models, things where the engineer doesn't have to start from scratch. Slide 10. So legacy is covered. What about new? For new aircraft, the Agile Mission Suite, AMS GRA is something new for those platforms that can be, quote unquote, born digital. One of the ideas is to provide more of an app-based capability. This is still pretty new to us, and as I mentioned, it's more of my colleagues from SAF AQX, so I might leave that for a more enlightened me to present to the group. Slide 11. So when it comes to open architectures, the MOSA approach, here are some notional use cases, but really any good systems engineering plan will include the ideas and concepts of MOSA. Some platforms will be more open in that they can implement more varied architectures to increase their interoperability with other platforms. Some may be limited in that only a few subsystems can be developed with open architectures just for the sake of the mission that they need to fulfill. And then in the future programs, the idea though would be to have more interoperability. That would be the standard versus the exception. All in pursuit of having greater return on investment. Slide 12. So coming back again to that digital trio, the idea is that we can't do them in serial. These things must be developed in parallel between the standards, the DMM, and the open architectures. Standards lead to better implementations. Those implementations have lessons learned and feedback into improving our standards. As our tooling gets better on the digital side, then so too will our open architectures be able to be developed quicker, and those lessons learned again go into our standards. So it's really an iterative, a very parallel path development. Slide 13. So I want to talk just a few moments about policy standardization. It's necessary to have standards to give guardrails to our developers. Not guardrails in the sense that we want to slow development. It's more like we need to make sure that at every waypoint that we're still going in the same direction, that we're still interoperable. And that's where standards need to be developed to answer a question, hopefully before it's asked. But if a good question is asked, then we need to be able to be flexible and improve that standard as well. To do that, we're going to have to rely heavily on computers, hopefully with a little bit of help from AI. So to kind of get the ball rolling on that, the Air Force has started working with a Center of Excellence out of Wright-Patt Air Force Base. We can go to slide 14. The Digital Innovation and Integration Center of Excellence are a group out of AFRL that has specialized in applying newer technologies. So we asked them to use a large language model to help model what 882, as an example, Middle Standard 882, would look like, and how we can use that to improve the standard. So what does that really mean? We asked them to take the standard, ingest it into their large language model, and then use that to analyze the standard for keywords, key portions of the document, and would see what it looks like from a kind of a strange model approach. And that's the photo that we have on the right there. That flower is the standard, and it kind of separates different portions of the document, and where one is a branch from another, for example, using keywords to kind of develop that. So as we go to improve it, then we can see, hey, here's what this standard looks like compared to other standards. If there's a glaring difference between the two, then we can say, well, what's the gap? Well, it may be that one document has an entire section that identifies a capability that we should also include in the other standard. On slide 15, we can take that and see how a standard will change based off of any changes that we make into it. So if you look at the center of that circle, that is 8A2. There's a small circle around that. Those are the primarily affected documents that can be affected by a change in 8A2. And then the bigger circle is your second degree documents that maybe it's related to 8A2 but not directly affected. Maybe it's affected by a document that's affected by the 8A2. So we can see in real time what a change to one document can make to others. DICE has been working pretty quickly, and they've ingested over 100 other documents into their model to have similar looking pictures there. But really, that kind of gives us a tool that will save hundreds of man hours from having to go through and scan through documents, read and reread to make sure that we're not missing something, and hopefully eliminating redundancy as well. So slide 16. So to bring it home, the Air Force is trying to be very deliberate in driving innovation in the digital domain. The reason is that we're able to leverage our people through the tooling. A person that is smart can be smarter quicker if they have the right tools with them. And so in order to build those tools, we're working diligently to make sure that we're developing those standards, those architectures, the digital material management together so that we can grow quickly. So with that, I think that's the brief, and if there are any questions, I'd love to address them.
All right. Thanks, Cliff. That was fantastic. And really, really excited about seeing where this is headed from here. And so the first question that we have is whether or not we'll be able to share these slides. Is there any issue that you have with posting these slides when we post the recording for the webinar? Is that okay?
Yes, there should be a PDF version that is marked for release.
Excellent, thanks. And then in terms of other questions, the idea that we have multiple standards integrations, we have a number of projects that has been explored on in the past. But do you have any particular projects on the Air Force that you'd like to highlight where we might be seeing some output from the work that you're doing here in standards integration and interoperability? Any recent programs that you want to highlight?
So GERA is kind of the big thing that the OAMO has been working on the past year. As that starts to get on rails, there is a little bit of a reshuffle due to Secretary Kendall's efforts last year, and that may drive a larger portfolio. But we should be seeing continued development with OMS-UCI, especially as SysML 2.0 comes along. So there'll need to be some upgrades there, and again, Agile Mission Suite should be coming online as well.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you. And also wanted to ask a question about like service interoperability, right? So I think as you know, as we talked about, I have a lot of background on the Army aviation side, and we've been doing a lot of the summit integration work with the Navy as well. And so the research that you've done with the impact of change in that large language model, is that something that's going to be made available to other program managers in the other service? Right now, I would imagine it's only an Air Force tool, but what's the prospect of making that tooling available to other program managers across the tri-services?
Yeah, I think the Air Force is very open and willing and happy to work with our sister services as much as possible to really reap the benefits of this tool. I know other groups have been pursuing large language models as well, and maybe there's a lot of lessons learned that could be injected into into our model, and sharing those results, I think, would be is the right thing to do, right? How we do that is kind of the less fun of. It's not so much the engineering that needs to catch up. It's the policy, right? So that's also one of my great challenges is how can I work within the system to improve our interoperability, and so that'll be a personal mission of mine to see what we can do to bring standardization across the services.
Great. Another question that came up is there are different kinds of reference architectures out there. SAGARA as a not as a standard, but as a collection of information about reference architectures. We also know that there are other architecture structures and frameworks out there. WOSA was one that came up in discussions, and it wasn't represented on the platform chart that you put up. But I know that you and I've talked about it. So where does WOSA fit into this structure?
WOSA is being worked into the OAMO's portfolio. That's part of the again part of the policy side. That it's a little bit of paperwork that we have to do to get that into the portfolio and get it palmed for, so that we can get the appropriate funding to maintain that standard. But ideally, and where I'd like to see my own PE go in the future is with that large portfolio of all reference architectures, at least within the Air Force, being managed by us in a uniform way, so that we can have that continuous development of the standard itself, and highlight the lessons learned from one to the other. So WOSA will be one that we are working to bring over into our managerial office, and we'd like to see similar consortium. They already have a consortium, but I'd like to see where we can streamline and improve the other standards based off of what they have as well. But yeah, WOSA is definitely a big and important RA that we'd like to keep maturing.
Excellent. All right, and so you mentioned consortia, and that brings up what I have as the last question on our list so far. So if anyone else has any questions, get them in now before we wrap up. But I will say that you mentioned consortia, and obviously the work that's happening will show there are maybe 2 or 3 different ways to solve the problems, and maybe a way to solve it with SOSA, and a way to solve it with FACE, and a way to solve it with OMS. The result will likely be here is the way that we choose to solve the problem, and we're going to need to solicit for industry feedback. So where does the Air Force sit at this point on looking at coordinating with all these different consortia, all the different standards bodies that are out there, so that you can get that consolidated feedback into this centralized management? How do you plan to take industry engagement going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's pretty layered, actually. So on the one hand, the more standards that we have under the OAMO portfolio, the more we can have a streamlined approach to the way we manage those standards. But as far as the individual consortia between the standards, that's something that we purposely try not to drive, right? We need the experts to be able to drive the standard based off of sound technical judgment, not based off of a arbitrary requirement per se. So on the one hand, we want to keep government as a key stakeholder and a funder for these standards, but we don't want to influence one change or the other. That needs to be based off what the right technical answer is. So working with industry, we'll use our managerial approach to standardize that, but the way they're implemented will come down to the individual program office, right? So when the question comes up, do we apply a WOSA standard here or a OMS standard? That'll really depend on the engineer closest to the problem and the program managers that support them.
All right, that's fantastic. That's a great answer, and of course the idea that any individual program manager, their primary responsibility is to field capabilities, right? And so we see that that ecosystem as a supporting ecosystem. That's a big part of what the Catalyst community is about. And so we hope to see you again. We hope to continue the conversation so that we can get this out into the ecosystem. We've recorded today so that we've got it out in the archives, and we're hoping that folks will share it and get that word out into other program offices as well as into other industrial centers of excellence at the various companies that produce most of the components and participate in those standards. And so any feedback that we hear after the fact, we're going to be more than happy to bring back to you and hope to see more about this as we progress towards the MOSA Summit in August of 2025. So, Cliff, do you have any closing comments or wrap up? And otherwise, I think that brings us to landing the plane.
Just really thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what the Air Force is up to. Appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, so we will give everybody 13 minutes of their day back. It's nice to have a very clear and good technical presentation that ends early for a change. So thank you everyone for joining, and please look forward to some additional coming announcements for future webinars, and we'll see you all in August.